All right, so who would like to confess first?
Oh, is that what
Just a reminder, we're
This
on
is the
camera,
yeah.
so we will be able to play that back for you. But that's what we decided, right? Chapter 4, search me and know me.
Oh, I thought we were 6. I thought I missed one and it was 4.
Well,
I
we'll get
read
there.
it,
We may
but
get
I-
there. Yeah.
Okay.
So we can start with looking at things that you may have underlined or things that stood out
Oh,
for
the whole
you.
chapter?
The whole chapter was just,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
We'll talk afterwards. But yeah.
The confessional.
Yeah. What I mean, when you just think of those words, search me and know me. How does that, just that sentence alone, just that invitation that you are giving to God, search me and know me. When's the last time you've said that to someone
Anyone.
close to you? Yeah, to anyone, right. Search me and know me. I remember, just in, I forget what I was telling Jackie one time, not too long ago, but it was like, that 5 years of dating was a pursuing time, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I was a slow
Difficult.
guy. I mean,
difficult.
for the first year or so, I used to say I low you.
Uh-oh.
But I didn't even put all the vowels in there yet, but I don't know if I said, hey, honey, how about you search me and know me? Yeah. Have there been times when you've actually, thought you wanted for people to help know you and it didn't work out well?
Or vice versa.
Well, that's scary.
Yeah.
Search me and know me, because
Yeah.
sometimes we don't know ourselves really,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
or what we know is less than what we'd like it to be.
So we haven't got, what are other thoughts on that? It's a very intimate statement, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. I think for me, with this covenant group I've been a part of for some of the guys we've been together 40 years across ministry, and there have been times for almost all of us, and a time for me, with the group where it was search me and know me, and it's probably not a good thing when somebody looks at you and says, "Are you out of your mind?"
I've searched you.
I've known. Yeah.
But the level of trust
Yeah.
in that, it's pretty rare. And that it worked out well, but it was not a smooth ride.
Yeah.
So, but I think those kind of relationships are few and far between.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Stephen Covey talked about, we all have this deep need to be seen, to be heard, and to be understood. And it is, just, again, I'm just, marveled by that, how much courage it takes on our part to say to God, search me and know me.
Well, I think we should look at the verbs, though.
Okay?
If you look at the first page of this chapter,
What chapter? 4?
Chapter 4, page 69.
Okay.
God has already
Right,
Yeah.
searched us,
right.
and He knows us. So it's not a matter of, please search me,
Right, right.
but rather, as you have searched me,
Mhm.
as you have searched me, and this allows me to search myself,
Yeah.
which is, as this chapter says, this is really all about confession.
You don't like to let me set things up, huh?
Pastors,
You went straight for the jugular, right?
You
Yeah.
gotta be faster.
I want you first of all to say, how much courage it takes on my part, because God already has searched me,
Oh.
and God already knows me, right?
And so the whole point, well, maybe it's not the whole point, but maybe this is also the theme of the Old Testament with the experience of the Israelites. Nobody knows themselves, and that's the key. How do you
No.
know yourself? so that you can admit that you fall short, that you have needs, you have spiritual goals and so forth. Because if you look at the Old Testament, I think you will agree that they didn't know themselves.
Right.
They were always screwing up.
They didn't know who they were.
Even though they had firsthand knowledge, laws, and revelations, they still screwed up.
Still today.
And so, maybe the whole scripture is saying, we have to look at ourselves.
Yeah. And that the invitation though has been, by starting with certain, the chapter title kind of sets you up to say you're asking God, you're inviting God, and I agree. We've already been searched, right? But the invitation is for you to hear God's invitation for you, to allow God to do that. Because think about, have you ever, I know you guys are a bunch of saints, so you have never been in this,
No.
you've never been in this moment where you're like, I hope Mom doesn't find out,
Oh, no.
right?
Never.
Never.
Again,
I bet you some of you don't even actually have, secrets from your parents, right? They knew everything about the things that you did, that
We
you
found
never
out
got
later.
away with anything, right?
It's true. Yeah.
Not so much.
Not so much, right?
They knew everything.
And so there's a part of you, you're not necessarily going to roll up and say, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, let me confess to you the things that I have done. Right? There's still some things that you probably have deep in the recesses of your heart. Right? You're going to take that with you to your grave.
But they know.
But, yeah. What if they did know?
I think they know.
Probably did.
Yeah. Well, because I have one stand there, we're all going to agree, we know.
No matter
Right?
what, we know.
And so my point is that that's often how we approach God. We think we can hide things from God, and then we're fearful if I take this before God,
Yikes.
there's going to be a shellacking that comes, right? That's not to say there's not necessarily at times. There's a difference between being shellacked out of anger and it's not uncontrolled, and then there's being, I know shellacking is like putting a lacquer thing on there, right?
Shiny.
Am I?
You're using the term correct.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I've been there. Taken out to the woodshed. And there's a time when you're like, all right, I know I deserve that. And, kind of thing. Does that make some sense? Do you find yourself, do you find yourself sometimes finding it a whole lot easier just to take it to God and not to the other person that was on the, because these things are always about relationships. It's always about relationships.
Said that somewhere.
And the invitation for us when we say, search me and know me, God, it's not just, because I think a lot of us would shake our head, yeah, like, oh, it's easy, take it to God.
But you have to open up that relationship.
Right, but the second part of that is I honestly believe that if you take it to God, God will say, well, leave your offering at the altar and go and make things right. Go and say, hey, I'm sorry. And you're like, can I come back? Can this be that I'm prone to wander moment? Right? Because God is all about relationships.
yeah.
So I agree. This idea that, yeah, we are. So in that searching and knowing, God already knows that wrestling that's going to go on within us. Any thoughts on that?
I just had this image of, it's like walking down a street and it's really dark, but there's a street light up ahead. And God may see me in the darkness and see me if I'm trying to hide in the darkness, but the trust it takes to be able to say to God, to step into the light of the street light and say, search me and know me, God. You know, to trust that God, I want you to be in the light.
Yeah, it's a great
Just
image.
look at
It's
it.
drawing you,
Right, to the
it's
light.
inviting you to the light.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Along that same lines, have you ever driven in the fog?
Ooh.
And when you're driving in the fog, all you can do is drive, 10 feet at a time or whatever.
Low
You just
beams.
in low beams, right? The light will only go out a certain distance,
Follow
but
the
you
red
keep
lights.
moving, you
The
keep
car in
moving.
front of you.
I hit that click, 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 click. Oh, I'm on wrong one.
Mhm.
Okay, what else?
I was reminded, and that's why I've been looking at this, when you were just talking, before you were talking, that is, how you started off, which I cannot quite remember.
Neither can I. It's
So-
on video
So
though.
it was the notion on page 76, in that notion of, we have been searched,
Hmm.
and God knows us.
It's the second paragraph.
At the very top, where sin is defined, at least, this is one way sin is defined. That sin is shorthand, see the last sentence of the,
Right.
almost.
It's got the
not
numeral
incomplete
7 next to it.
paragraph. Sin is shorthand for any attempt to meet our deep needs by our own
You
resources.
said that. You
And
said-
so when we have been searched and we try to know ourselves, it is often the case that we still are separated from God because we want to do it, we want to do it by our own resources. And that's not going to work.
Do you find as you get older that you become more self-reliant?
Oh, heavens, no.
Let me ask you. Let me put it to you a different way. Have you had the conversation with your adult children? Hey, it's time for you to give me your car keys.
What?
Of course you haven't. But can you imagine that day coming?
No, I can imagine it the other way around.
I think that's what he meant.
Let me just invite you to think about what did that just conjure up for you? If your adult children suddenly have come to you and said, "It's time to give me your car keys."
I've done it to my mother.
Yeah,
I had to do that.
yeah.
It wasn't
But
happening.
I mean, all of us are going to be on the other end here pretty soon.
But I had a good example, because my dad always has driven, he did not want to give up his keys. So I sat there and he was reading, and then he had to look like this, I go, look how you're holding your book, and then you want to drive? I think it hit him when I said that.
Well, I can tell you what I would have done. I would have used that little power button on my thing, and I would just try to scoot it as far close to the steering wheel and look that way. But I mean, I've been in enough conversations with adult children who have said, "I need your help to talk to my adult parents because they won't give me." It's just, and I'm just inviting you to go with what was just said, the struggle that we would have about. Because all of us sitting around this table probably would argue that is a sign of independence.
Oh, yeah.
But we should not think about independence.
Right.
That's doing it our way.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
what we do.
We are always dependent
We're
on
human.
God. We ought not ever to be dependent on ourselves. And so I think part of this chapter certainly says, hey, if you're 80 years old or 90 years old, you should know yourself because God knows you. You should know yourself well enough to give up the keys.
Yeah.
And if you
Oh.
don't give up the keys, well, it says here on page 89, search me. Oh, God, I can't read anything.
We just
Can't
talked
read
about that.
anything.
I'm gonna need your car keys.
Good one.
Search me, Lord,
89.
and know me.
been wanting
Wait,
to say that
pay
for a while.
attention to what may come up. Note how God begins to reveal you
Confess.
to yourself. And I think that's the whole issue of sin. Sin is like wanting to keep the car keys all the time. Because I want to be able to drive myself. And
It's a human.
that goes against human nature.
Well, I heard something the other day that was pretty interesting. Your ego is not your amigo.
That's good.
But think about what we've all been doing,
It's all
right?
about- Yeah.
We've been feeding our ego for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. It's a habit. I agree. I mean, the challenge is letting go. If my pattern has always been, and I've shared this with you all before, I mean, that is a huge challenge for me. To be
Not
more
intentional,
God
yeah.
reliant and less self reliant. And I my other part of that challenge as well is that I don't think God created me to be a robot. I mean, I'm happy that my children, know how to go to the bathroom and wipe themselves, right? They're not reliant upon me to come and do that anymore,
You
right?
train them well.
Right? Yeah. We go on an airplane, he can do his own diaper change. I don't have to do that anymore, kind of scenario. So I think there's some in there, but I do think we have to call attention to our egos. Because it's not our amigos.
Wow.
Yeah. I wish I could remember that pastor who said that, because it wasn't me.
You just said that.
Yeah.
Well, it reminds you of a scripture verse that everybody knows. The first shall be
Yeah.
last, the last
That
shall
shall
be
be first.
shall be first. And
Yeah.
nobody wants to be last.
Yep. I thought you were going to refer to the part of who told you were naked.
Oh, yeah.
That was really powerful.
That's a different one.
Well, it's that same
that
concept
mean?
though of
Yeah.
that because
Did you-
if we go through thinking I can hide everything, and now someone comes and says, "Hate to tell you this, but you're exposed."
You're naked.
When I read that, I thought of, this was years ago when Glenn and Kate Marr's child, John, was young. I'm pretty sure that it was him. He kept taking like big utensils out of the kitchen. And Kate's like, stop doing that. And she was in the living room or something, and John comes out and he had one. And he had it like this.
He didn't mind, so you couldn't
So in
see
his
it.
mind, he's like, if you can't see her,
She's not
she
gonna
can't
see
see
it.
me.
Right.
And
That's
on a
great.
little bit bigger level.
Right? Yeah.
Wow.
As adults, I think sometimes we want to
Yeah.
push these bad things so down. It's down so far. God's
Yeah.
not gonna. He's not gonna see it. But oh yeah, he is.
That's a great image. Great image.
hmm
Yeah.
When I read that line, the instinctive human response to sin is hiding. I don't know
Right.
why, that just popped in my head.
I
of
see
him doing
nothing,
that.
so he doesn't.
I
Yeah,
don't
I
see
know.
anything.
She can't see me if I can't see her.
Yeah. Yep. Good. Anything else?
Well, just a little farther down, in that next paragraph on page 76, that is a great sentence to me. Sin defined by the biblical imagination is not an accusation or a condemnation. It's just a diagnosis. And that's a helpful sentence to me. It's to be willing to see and name a sin. And to not run away from it, not to be ashamed of it, but to say, I need to know this. It's like finding out I have high blood pressure or,
Yeah.
not a good reading of my cholesterol. I need to know this so that it can be dealt with.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I'm not sure that gets preached that way. I'm not sure I've always preached it that way. Oftentimes sin is, if preachers preach on it at all, it's bad, which only
Love
just
sin.
asks people to duck for cover,
Yeah, I use an archery range.
Okay. It's good, Tim.
I like those props, where you get to see the arrow flying
Right,
and it's, oh, I missed the mark.
But that new member is down.
Yeah, that's right. See what my sin did? It took him out. Yeah. No, it's a great.
But if you go to the next paragraph, the issue with sin isn't God has a tight moral grid and coloring within the lines is how we prove we're on his side. It's that sin inhibits us from doing what we were made to do best.
Read that, keep reading.
Yeah.
Don't stop there.
Yes.
What is it we're made to do best?
What we're made to do best, love, to receive love and to give it. And then just a few sentences down, he goes, sin is a refused relationship with God that spills over into a wrong relationship with others.
That was good.
Yeah, this whole page was just like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's lots of
Brimming.
meat in there.
yeah.
What do you guys make of that idea that it's that sin inhibits us from doing what we're made to do best? Love, to receive love, and to give it.
I think part of the thing that makes that difficult for us when we sin is that selfish our desire for what we want, and when that's not aligned, it's difficult then to do the work of loving. Our campus pastor, Pastor Bernie, always uses the analogy of the football, the correct football field, and that the
pitch?
Do you mean
No,
soccer?
that's cricket.
Oh.
I mean football.
American
American.
football.
I am talking
American
about football.
Please.
Yeah. Pitch when you're talking about soccer.
I thought so too,
Yeah.
but she wanted me
It's
to
on
tell you.
Ted Lasso, it is.
It's cricket.
It's a field.
All right, whatever.
They all
Yes.
call it pitch.
We'll let the.
So yes, so there are lines so that you can enjoy the game, because when the ball is outside of the boundaries of the sport or the field, then it becomes chaotic, and it no longer is fun, because if you're kicking the ball 2 meters outside of the line, where there is no enjoyment of the game, because things kind of go chaotic. And so when we stay within the boundaries of what he's asking us to do, it helps us to live that full life. When we step outside of those boundaries, thinking that we're having ourselves a good old time, you've really just prevented yourself from enjoying the game to the fullest.
The challenge for us is which of those fields, whatever we call it, has the right dimensions.
Yeah, do you recognize
And-
them?
Yeah,
What
and
is
but okay. So if you think of it, each sport
Right.
has different dimensions.
That's what I would have encouraged us to go to. Is
Yes.
they, so my point is, though, that I could, I just finished watching a Netflix docu-series on the English game. And it was the gentlemen who were upset because the working class were taking over their game and had different rules and different ways of dealing with things. And so the challenge for us is to say my dimensions are the right dimensions, instead of understanding that God operates in a multitude of dimensions. And then the question is, if I'm operating, so for example,
Is
if
that
my...
accurate, though, Pastor Tim? Because if you're on a soccer field, the dimensions are always the same, regardless of the soccer field that you play on. If you're on a football field, the dimensions are always the same.
Right.
On a tennis court, a regulation tennis court, the dimensions are always the same. So if you start changing the dimensions of this particular sport, then it becomes an issue, but it doesn't mean that we can't enjoy multiple games.
Right. But what I would suggest, though, is that we're experiencing sport in different settings with
Right,
different
okay,
dimensions.
I hear you.
And so you're having the opportunity to experience God in different ways,
Okay,
with different
amen.
dimensions. But I agree that so if I wanted to stay in a dimension, in my experience of God was going to be, a lot of times when you tell people you grew up in the military and you've been around the military all the time, they think you're going to be this very structured. I mean, I remember when I went to First and Fort Pierce, Arlene was my administrative assistant, and Kathy was my kind of youth pastor. And both of them, for a while, were trying to figure out, are we supposed to stand at attention when he
Yes,
comes
sir.
in?
Yes,
I'm
sir.
serious. That's why I was giggling when I was thinking about, and so they had this mindset that
Military.
because he's coming out of the military, that those are the dimensions that he operates from, right? And so if my experience of God was as a very rigid, structured, then my entire life would be that way. And that would be fine, except for it rubs up against other people's dimensions.
Yeah.
And it also
Right.
closes me down to experiencing other dimensions of God. God's just not. God certainly shows up in that dimension. I mean, but what we're defining and describing is the very challenge that Jesus had. The Pharisees and Sadducees had their own dimensions, and now somebody was introducing yet another dimension. John. I mean, when
Well, maybe he wasn't introducing another dimension, maybe he was going beyond the boundaries that
Okay.
were set.
Well,
And that was
You
what.
sure you're not a lawyer?
Upset everybody.
He's a new
Upset everybody. So I'm nervous about this
Well-
dimensions, these lines, these distances, because it seems to me that you have to get out of the boundary
sure.
in order to do
Don't
God's
agree with
will.
that.
Well, the challenge always is any time we try to put God in a box, a dimensioned box, we limit our expression, our experience of God. God is more than the dimensions. But for sake of the conversation, sometimes it's easier for us to be fluid in those things. Yes, Brenda, would you like to?
No, not at all. Just
You know,
let you
this-
know I am here.
Yeah.
This whole discussion about sin in the book, he says at one point that in Hebrew, there are 8 different ways. And it would have been nice if we could have read those different definitions. Because what I worry about is that people think of sin as an action. I'm not supposed to do that. I'm not supposed to do that. I'm not supposed to do that.
Sure.
And
it's the 10 Commandments.
uh,
Do not.
and that sin may not be an action. Sin may be a state of existence. Because we are separated from God. That I think is one of the keys, if not the key, for sin. And I keep going back to the thing that we had last week or the week before, the Roman Catholic. If I'm a Roman Catholic, I can take a list of all of my sins. I can go to confession to the priest, and I can say, well, I stole this, I did that, and all he has to do, it's always a he, all he has to do is say,
10 Hail Marys.
yeah, say 5 Our Fathers, and go in peace. So I think it would be nice to talk about sin in a different way than we often think of it as an action.
Well, I would say that the conversation tonight has invited us. I mean, if you go back to what was said earlier about the idea that it's a diagnosis. So what is it diagnosing? And if we come down here and we say the diagnosis, whatever it is, it's causing me not to do what I was made to do best. Right? Love, to receive love, and to give it. And so if there's a time where I'm like walking around feeling like woe is me, right? I might not be in a place, and I haven't done any of the whatever, 10 Commandments. I haven't broken any laws or things like that, but I'm just walking around saying woe is me, have my own little Eeyore moments, right? Am I in a place to receive love? Because I know I'm not in a place to give love. So it kind of gives me, in my mind, it gives me some metric to look at. Is this sin? Well, tell me. Are you in a place to love? Now, then the invitation is, what kind of love are we talking about? Right. Then we can look at, am I loving myself the way Christ loves me? Am I loving others the way Christ loves them? Right. And in the Methodist terminology, we would talk about that as perfecting grace, right? I'm learning to love, as Jackie and I would say, I love you more today than yesterday, but not as much as
I love you
tomorrow,
tomorrow.
right? It's a growing, we're asked the question, are you anticipating being perfect,
Going on to perfection.
going on to perfection in this lifetime? And we all look at each other and like, you talking to me? Right? Have you not searched me and known me? Right? But it's the idea that I want to be more loving today than I was yesterday. So I'm constantly aware of my diagnosis. My diagnosis tells me I'm not good at loving and I'm not good at receiving love.
Because we all fall short of the mark.
Right. So but I also get a prescription, right? The diagnosis is you suck at receiving love and you suck at giving love, but I've got a prescription for you. Become more like me. Follow my teachings. Look at my example.
What if you love someone, you don't want anything, but you don't like them?
Well, the invitation did say, I gotta like
Is this
you.
close to home? Is this close to home?
No, I'm listening.
Yeah.
But really, you love someone, you don't want anything, but you really,
I love my dad, but I didn't like him.
okay.
I would not
Well,
have,
that was a
if we were drinking buddies, that would not have been my drinking partner.
Okay, gotcha.
To go back to the point that you were referring to, again, on page 75 in the middle of the page, where he was talking about the multiple, the 8 different Hebrew words.
Yeah, in the middle of the page there.
Yeah.
Yes. He says the broad biblical definition is given in the form of a story, not a statement. And then further down, it is about the state of our souls. So while it is a state of being, it also manifests itself in the things that we do. So while your point, while we're saying it's not an action, well, the actions that we do are a manifestation of the sin that we have in our soul. So to say it's not about an action, I think trivializes it somewhat, or not maybe trivializing,
But
but
they go together. I'm
Yes.
sin sick,
yes.
and the symptoms of my sickness
Sickness
reveal
reveals it
themselves.
precisely.
These things I see,
Yes,
these things I
precisely.
do or don't do.
Yeah, I give it as a formula where it says T plus F plus A equals R. So my thinking or my thoughts plus my feelings lead to my actions, and it produces the results. If I don't like the results that I'm
You
getting,
gotta change.
if I'm not loving, right, then I go back and think about, what were my thoughts? Because my thoughts influence the way I feel, and I act on my feelings, right? And so if I just constantly go through that kind of little math formula there, again, it goes back to what we're saying about this whole diagnosis. Our diagnosis is that, some sort of quote in songs, we lost that loving feeling.
Whoa,
Imagine, again, if Adam and Eve had said to the temptation that was happening here, that's okay, I know he loves me. I don't need to know.
Anything else?
Yeah, this is, right? But we didn't trust, the root of that. So, yeah. Great stuff.
Last point.
Okay.
On the bottom of 76, where he talks about David and, David in saying, against you and you alone have I sinned. I think also too, it helps us to realize that while others may have been impacted, it really is about that fractured, or I don't know if fractured is a correct term, because nothing can separate you from God, but that we have stepped outside of that relationship, or we have made ourselves self-sufficient, regardless of who else may have been impacted by it. It really is us stepping outside of that intimate relationship with God. And that to me was just a powerful thing.
I would want to push on that just a little bit, though.
Sure.
Because I would argue that if I've sinned against you, I've sinned against God.
No, understand.
And so I have a problem with him just saying, against you only have I sinned. I'm like, no.
Well, I think you can imagine the utter grief that he was, if I look at it in context, and I think about, there's a man that's dead, there's a woman who are violated.
There's a nation
There's
that
a,
would be divided
yes,
forever.
yes.
Yeah.
And there's a son that I had prayed for that is now dead. Though, not that he's oblivious or immune to those pieces, but it is, oh my gosh, had I been stayed and focused on you,
Maybe.
these are the consequences for, and not that God made those things happen, because sometimes you hear people say that as well, and you're like, stop
Right.
that, that's,
But
yeah.
it also, and I agree, it adds though as well, if I think about, if I hurt or offend or wound, that I'm doing that to God
Absolutely.
as well.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Because God is in that relationship.
But I think you just supported the point I made, because if of you alone against you have I sinned, so if I hurt you, I've really hurt God.
Yes.
And
I wasn't arguing with you.
And I think it would be good to finish that paragraph at the very top. We do not sin against a rule or a law. That is, do not steal. That's not sin. To steal is not sin. Rather,
it is.
we sin against our Father.
But he told us not to do certain things.
Well,
So if
it's
we
just
break
not
those
only
rules-
against the law,
Right.
it's against.
I know a lot of folks that would
He's
like to
very-
believe that
he's very
stealing is not
powerful
a.
here.
Yeah.
We do not sin against a rule or a law. That's what this guy's saying. We sin against our Father.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think
not a
he's
piece.
trying to be that
One or
literal.
Granular,
I think
no.
he's
One or the other.
he's inviting us to go to your point that you were talking about earlier, where all we do is define sin as rules or laws, and I didn't
And
break any
actions,
rules or
yeah.
laws, so I must not have sinned.
Right.
I forget what I was watching something one time, and the refrain was, the guy kept saying, well, I didn't break the law. Yeah, but you didn't do the right thing either.
Morally, or,
You know, that kind of gets caught in, I think, in that.
And then on the next page,
Well, at this rate, we're only gonna do one chapter, somebody all.
79.
This was, no,
Yes.
this chapter is
Kind
really
of in the
full.
middle,
Mhm.
that second full paragraph that talks about this, how Jesus deals with our sin. He suffers with us.
Yeah.
He suffers the consequences of our thoughts and actions. Oh, wow,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
powerful.
I think about, trust me, this is the exception, not the rule, but we used to, have our granddaughters occasionally. And especially when we lived in Jacksonville, they came up for almost a week for what we call Camp Smiley. And we'd gone downtown, across the river and gone downtown, and we were coming back, and our car was parked in a parking garage. And our little one, Penny, who was, how old at the time, 5 or 4, something like that age, she started running ahead. She's running towards the parking lot where all the cars are, and I started,
Your parents'
yelling, I said,
nightmare.
"Come, Penny, stop, stop, stop." And finally, I had to run up and catch her. And I told her, because she didn't listen, she had to sit in timeout when we got home. Oh, she was crying, because I
grandma
yelled
did
at her,
that to
me. Yeah.
and
My
everything.
It's more about
so-
disappointing you and being
Yeah.
hurt that
Because I
made her
yelled at her,
upset.
yeah. So I decided, when we got home, I put 2 chairs in front of the glass sliding doors that looked out in the backyard. And I said, "No, you're gonna have to sit in timeout for 5 minutes." I said, "But I'm gonna sit with you."
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
and so we sat there together. And that's what made me think of that.
What is the purpose of
Like that and
timeout?
stuff like that.
Punishment.
Usually to give the adult a break.
No, but isn't
Be
the,
quiet.
the whole concept of taking a timeout, that you think about
Yes.
yourself, you think
Yes.
about your
Supposedly.
situation? And so I think that fits perfectly into what is being said here about the need for confession, to realize the estrangement. If you go a little bit further in that paragraph, if you think about the estrangement from God that we willingly chose by managing our sin, prayer, maybe we should write a book, Prayer as Time Out. You ready, Tim?
You meant that, Tim, right? You got more time. I bet you there's a book out there that's titled Prayers Time Out, but, yeah. So let's flip that a little bit though. So, how does it cause, where does it land for you to think about that you did, there are times I'll run around, especially as a pastor of church, and say, I didn't create the mess. Can you imagine God saying, I didn't create the mess. I didn't make the choice that you made, but I'm gonna sit with you with the consequences of it. I'm not taking away the consequences. I'm just gonna endure the consequences with it. The penalty of sin is death. We don't get to escape death, but God endured it with us already. We have the luxury of knowing that that's not the end of the story, right? Like, your granddaughter Penny saying, I know I don't have to sit here forever. Right. There's a cookie and milk on the other side of this
When I
thing.
get there, yeah.
But what I can't get into it, but I'm sure there's part of thinking the relationship is going to be back to where it was when this is all over.
That piece,
Or
yeah.
bigger and better,
Right.
somewhere it says in that chapter.
Yeah,
After that confession and after bringing it to God,
yeah.
instead of less, you're more.
We're more, yeah.
That makes me smile just because my daddy was like that.
Yeah.
Mhm. He would be the one that would put me to sit down as a teenager, and then he would whip out his newspaper and sit beside me, and we'd sit in silence. But it would be.
So would I have like a 3.5 hour timeout? They're different. I've done different things.
Yeah.
But again, the thought process of wow, someone
Yeah.
else is having to.
Mhm.
Has chosen.
Has chosen to sit alongside me here in this silence
Yeah.
when I was the one
To
that
suffer
did wrong.
with me.
Mhm.
Not to judge, he says, but to
Not to
rescue.
judge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not to judge, but to rescue.
Yeah.
Although we could talk more about this. That is, at some point, is there an inferno to which souls go, and they're not sitting there next to God?
Yeah.
It's purgatory.
Then there's purgatory, which they're still not sitting next to God.
That wasn't in this chapter.
I will tell you that conversation.
You like that?
I will tell you that conversation has set me up to be the son of Satan.
That's entirely true. Because maybe it is not this chapter.
Precisely, it wasn't in this chapter.
No, it was the previous one, and which, we didn't talk about. The Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. What is everybody doing in heaven?
Bowing down, if you listen to what they say in
They are singing praises.
Singing
Lots of
praises.
songs,
Singing
and I'm
praises.
not sure I'm really excited about
oh
that.
yeah, man. No, well, you get to
And so
catch your
what?
crowns.
Yeah.
You can just shout out
There
holy,
may
holy,
be some who are
holy.
not singing praises.
I'm losing the group here.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep shut.
No,
No,
you're fine.
no.
You're fine. I mean, that isn't the reason I
take a
find that to
timeout.
be an important question. What's that?
He's taking a time.
I'll take a time.
Yeah, no. I think it's important because it does speak a lot of time. Unfortunately, the ways in which people are inspired or motivated to have this relationship with God, versus for me the thought process. What inspires me to want to reach people who are far from God? It is not the fear of hell. It's, man, what you're missing out on. I mean, just think how we started this whole conversation about search me and know me, and what the longing is for us to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. And the people we have done the life with the longest, they know us, but they don't know us. And yet the creator of the universe, who breathed life into us, that's all that our creator wants to do, is to know you. And so that's why I get up in the morning. That's why I preach when I preach. That's why, when I was in the military, I loved, love is a strong word. That's kind of like saying, fun in the military. But I love deployments because life stunk. I was away from my family. They were away from their family. There was all kinds of craziness going on. And man, the conversations I got to have with people
many
that were
people.
far from God.
Hmm.
Now I come back, here, it's not
It's boring.
not boring. That's not, it's just not the same because, there's so many ways in which we self-medicate, right? On the ship, there's so many movies you can watch, and then you just can't watch any more movies. There's so many hours that you can run on a treadmill, and you can't. And eventually, they want to talk to somebody. It's always at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't get it. But, when you're sitting out in the desert and you're watching sand grow,
What?
you can't believe how exciting it is when a chaplain shows up. It's
Somebody
like
to talk.
finally a conversation.
Mhm.
Wow.
And there's some bizarre conversations out there. I love the first question someone asked me. So do you think there are Martians out there? Like, okay.
Oh.
Then there was some other stuff that came with that question that I won't repeat here, but only a Marine could come up with some of those questions. But it's just so, so that's the reason I'm not worried about either one of those. I'm just worried about someone just not being able to experience what you get to experience, what you already know. We talked about, at the beginning that God invites us to come with our anxieties and our worries and our uncertainties and our joys. I remember there were times, I wanted to talk to Jackie, and I'm like, gosh, I wish she'd get home from work, or I'd be deployed and wanted to talk to her, and the time zones were so different, and like, I can't hold this in any longer. I need to talk. Well, the Father is right there all the time, and people who don't know that,
Go crazy.
yeah, and they're missing out if
They're
we're
missing
not.
out.
If we, but if I go to them and say, hey, if you got hit by a bus today, do you know where you're going? I'm going to go to Tampa General, or I'm going to go to St. Pete, I'm in after that.
Oh, after that.
I'm playing out the
Tread right,
conversation.
right,
It's like,
right.
I'm not into that conversation. Doesn't mean it's important. It's more like, who do you call at 3 o'clock in the morning
Yeah,
when the yogurt's hitting the fan?
Mhm.
God is there all the time. Well, how do I talk to God? The same way we're talking right now.
Exactly.
One of the things I think is important not to miss in this chapter too is that he focused a lot and talked a lot about confession.
Mm.
And,
Why is it good for the soul? We'll end on that note.
well, yeah, because it was, you really lay yourself naked before God.
Yeah.
And I think on 82 when he says, David was known as a man after God's own heart, and I've said it a million times myself, And yeah, he sinned and he this and he that, but he was a man after God's own heart. And I think it really came alive for me today when he said, and it's because he unashamedly said always, here is where I have sinned. Here is where I have gone astray. So I really do think that is something to that struck home for me in this, when you're putting all the pieces together, the importance of really confessing and being honest.
And it's
with God.
interesting that you use the phrase, I think, to undress yourself before God. When on page 87, the corollary is there, God's response to my desire is simple, loving and straightforward. You will have to let me undress you. Which, again, is that tension between one's
Yes.
effort and God's action. And of course, that was a brilliant thing this writer wrote, because it goes back to, are you naked? Or,
Yeah.
how are you naked? And
Yeah.
that whole business about being undressed
You-
before God, and letting God be the one that actually undresses you.
You remind me, if you are ever in my office and you come to my desk, you'll see a statue that sits there where he's of a man who's half dressed with the skin, and he's looking up, and then there's this transparent portion of him. But you can, if you look closely at the face, you see the pain of the old being removed and the new being revealed. Because it is a painful process. I mean, it's not easy for a lot of us to go and say, oops, I made a mistake. I did that wrong. Please forgive me. I lost my cool in that moment, or any number of those things, because we have treated our ego like an amigo, and it's not. All right, friends.
Yes.
So-
On page 82, about sin, Eugene Peterson, what was that?
Right in the middle of the paragraph.
Yeah. I thought that meant God deals with sin by forgiving us. When he forgives us, there is no more of us.
Yeah.
There is more of us, not less.
Sure.
I thought that was
Yeah.
a good interpretation.
More of us is revealed. Yeah. And again, I think I really appreciated Tim calling that out, that this is a diagnosis, right? And the diagnosis is, when I go to my kids and I say, oops, I blew that, what's causing me to go there is realizing I can do better. I was meant to do better. That's not who I'm supposed to be in that moment, right? So if we're connected with, who am I? That's why you hear me say, you're a beloved son, a beloved daughter.
That's who
So when we I lived like a beloved dog today, not a beloved son or daughter. But you say, oops, right? Oops.
Yeah.
Shall we close in prayer? Sure.
It's time already?
I know, you guys are really good.
What chapter where are we?
We got to 4.
Wow.
We may not get through the whole book. I just want you to.
How many years?
We may have to extend this.
Yeah.
Well, you said until April, so that's 8-9 weeks more.
Yes, we'll see how, we'll get there.
We can do it.
We
You
can.
think? How many chapters?
I'm taking a
are
break
there?
in March for one of those weeks, so.
Me too.
So, all right, let's. God, you have been great to us and so generous. What a rich dialogue you gave to us tonight, and I am thankful for all that has been said and all the ways in which these thoughts are landing upon us. I pray, Lord, that they would just they would percolate, they would stew. And whatever other kind of word I can not think of at this moment, like in a crock pot, kind of, they would simmer and just be touched by you in such a way that we would find great peace in saying, search me and know me, O Lord. May each of us tonight experience that blessing of rest. May we join with you in looking back on where we've been today, the things that we have done well as the things that we could have done better. And may we hear your words of love and your words of correction in the ways of love, so that when we wake tomorrow, we will be prepared and we will be ready to be with a God who truly invites us to be on the move with him. Bind our hearts together as we join praying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us of our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Thank you, my friends.
Thank you.
Have a great night. Drive home safely.
I guess I'll see you tomorrow.